Good morning. My name is Kelly Osmolsky from EXL Events. I would like to welcome everyone to the EXL Events and Avoca webinar. Grace Crawford and Steve Whitaker will be discussing inspection preparation with the risk-based approach consistent with the ICH E6R2 requirements. I would like to first introduce Grace. She is Vice President, Clinical Quality and Compliance at MedImmune. Grace joined MedImmune in April 2015 as head of the clinical quality and compliance function. She is responsible for supporting the clinical biologics area with MedImmune. She is active in the industry, participating in forums such as the Society for Quality Assurance, the Avoca Quality Consortium, and Linking Leaders Clinical Quality Roundtable. She earned a Master of Science degree in clinical microbiology at the Medical College of Pennsylvania. I would now like to introduce Steve Whitaker, Senior Consultant of the Avoca Group. Steve Whitaker is an Executive Director of the Avoca Quality Consortium and Senior Consultant with the Avoca Group. Steve is a lead consultant for the pharmaceutical, biotech, and CRO industries, who provides expertise in project management, pharmaceutical development, clinical development, outsourcing strategies, and execution plans. In 2009, Steve retired from Eli Lilly and Company, where he served as the Chief Operating Officer and Senior Director of Operations and Project Management for the Cardiovascular Acute Care Platform. Steve also led Lilly's Project Management Center of Excellence, establishing standards for leaders of project development. Both Steve and Grace will be speaking at EXL Events' 7th Clinical Trial Inspection Readiness that will be taking place next month, August 13th to the 14th in Philadelphia at the Inn at Penn Hilton Hotel. You will be able to ask any questions you might have on the left-hand side. If we don't get to answer any of your questions, after the webinar, you will receive an email from Avoca answering all your questions. If you're interested in registering for EXL Events' 7th Clinical Trial Inspection Readiness Summit, there is a 15% discount code. We hope you all enjoy the webinar. The webinar will now begin.
Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are as you log into this webinar. This is Steve Whitaker. I will begin by sharing some broader aspects around risk-based approaches and inspection readiness related to our ICH E6R2. Grace will then focus on some case study examples that are very specific and that provide some key insights. So the topics that we will be covering today, we would like to compare inspections from different regulatory authorities. We would also like to begin to compare the foci of those inspectors, what they inspect, what they didn't inspect to determine compliance. We will have some firsthand experiences of sponsors that uncover common pitfalls. We will look at the MHRA's emphasis on conducting risk-based analysis. There's a study example related to that as well. We're going to comply with ICH E6R2 changes by adapting risk-based tools and methods. And we will focus on how to effect a risk-based approach to inspection readiness with tried and tested strategies. So I will again focus on the early portions of that agenda topics. To put this in context, though, I would first like to describe how the Avoca Group is well positioned to share what we are going to share in terms of inspection experiences across 6 major regulatory agencies. On the left of this, you'll see that we have the Quality Consortium. I will show you more in just a moment, but there are over 90 member companies who are participants in this pre-competitive consortium. Pre-competitive in that quality is viewed as necessary for the industry and is where we can actually collaborate and share leading practices to enable the industry to elevate quality across all the value stakeholders, being sponsors, providers, also investigative sites, and all the way to patients. One of the major work streams within the consortium is around inspection readiness, and I'll give you some perspective on that. Avoca also does consulting services, and as a part of those consulting and research services, we provide inspection support services that include conducting mock inspections of sponsors, providers, and sites, training on effective inspection management, and consulting support for responses and remediations across health authority inspections. Much of the content that goes into that consulting comes from the regulatory intelligence that's housed within the Quality Consortium, and you'll see that here and how it plays out in a moment. So the Quality Consortium, as I indicated, there are over 90 member companies. It also does research and develops leading practices across our member companies. This slide simply shows the members of the consortium. Many of you on this call, hopefully a good percentage of you are employees or participate with these companies in one fashion or another. It includes sponsor-based pharma biotech companies, also CRO provider companies, even technical service provider companies. So it's a very integrated, broad network of membership. As we get started, we would like to begin with a polling question. You'll have ability to actively go in and respond to this on your screen. So we know that failed inspections can cost $200 million or more in opportunity costs and direct costs associated with remediation. Which of the following deficiencies are you most concerned that your organization would experience during inspections? And you can choose all that apply. The responses can be failure to bring investigators into compliance, failure to follow the investigational plan or the regulations, inadequate documentation of quality management systems, inadequate IMP accountability, inadequate monitoring, inadequate oversight of providers, inadequate record keeping, inadequate subject protection for the informed consent form and adverse event reporting, or protocol deviations. We'll give you a moment to respond, and then we'll show the results. Okay, so here are the responses, and there may still be some adjustments as people may still respond. But you will note that inadequate oversight of providers comes up as the most dominant anxiety point. Then there's also inadequate documentation of the quality management systems. And we all know that with ICH E6R2, which we're going to be talking about today, that drives expectations more for documented quality management systems, not only within sponsor companies, but across your stakeholder groups, including your provider organizations and your investigative sites. So that's a complex aspect to the quality management systems. You'll also see the record-keeping aspects being important, failure to bring investigators into compliance, and protocol deviations also typically stands out as fairly high, and then monitoring related to that as well. So pretty broad brush perspective of the areas that create potential risks and concerns. So let's look a little bit more about what the experiences have been by member companies of the consortium. So if we look at this aspect, what the consortium has been able to do across our members is to recognize that while member companies may not share inspection experiences directly from company to company because it might be very specific to their circumstances and it could be viewed as airing their dirty laundry. The consortium, however, provides them an opportunity to share their experiences to a central staff at Avoca, who then can look across all the member companies and identify the most prevalent items that are being highlighted or the most impactful experiences. We're also able to anonymize the information and provide it back to our members without indicating which companies experienced which activities or which outcomes. So therefore, it provides the venue to share across our members without actually having individual companies called out. So it's a 4-layer grid. The first is around agency overview. The second layer is around the focus the agencies take. The third layer is around member experiences and tips. And then the fourth is around pharmacovigilance, specific types of inspections. You'll see that we have experiences and insights across 6 major agencies: the US FDA, the EMA from Europe, MHRA from the UK, we have PMDA from Japan, CFDA from China, and Health Canada. We have specific categories that will be covered in each. And here's some images that I'm going to show you that articulate what that looks like. So for the first layer of the grid, we focus on agency overviews. We can compare across those 6 agencies the types of inspections, the triggers for those inspections, the areas that they focus on when they conduct the inspections, the approach that they actually take, and the findings that are most prevalent and most impactful across those agencies. The second layer of the grid focuses on what they will look at. So they focus on the trial master file, but there are differences across the agencies about how they look at the eTMF, and I'll be sharing some of the content here in just a moment. This is just a blank image of the layers. Then we have a focus on monitoring of investigative sites. They focus on systems and data, the site performance, documentation, the protocols themselves, and the selection, qualification, and oversight of providers. Those are some of the major areas that the agencies will focus on. We then have a layer where our members have shared their actual experiences. These are the experiences that they've had when the investigators on site. And also, we have tips. The tips are suggestions that our members have shared to say, these are the things that have worked especially well, or where we did not perform well, but what we're going to do differently next time to make sure that we do perform well. And the areas that we'll look at is related to experiences and tips on logistics, on what's happened with the trial master file, the inspections on the monitoring, and so on and so forth. You can see all the way down through pharmacovigilance, and then there's even a general category of experiences and tips. Again, I'm going to share some content here in just a moment. And finally, the pharmacovigilance. As we know, there can be standalone pharmacovigilance inspections, or they can be part of other inspections. But when they do pharmacovigilance-focused inspections, they do aspects that we have insights on for logistics, how they use your trial master file, the monitoring, and so forth related to all of those. So similar to the experiences, but it's pharmacovigilance specifics for this particular layer. So what does that look like? So what I'm going to show you now are actual examples of content. Now you have to realize that the content in the Avoca Quality Consortium Knowledge Center, which is an online system that our members can access, will have far more content at a much deeper detail than can be shared in PowerPoint slides. But I'm going to give you some real insights in these slides, and these slides will be made available to you at the conclusion of this session, so you will have them for reference. So going back to the first layer of the grid, so if we look at the agency overview, how do the FDA, EMA, and MHRA compare from a types of inspections? You'll see that the FDA and EMA focus on marketing applications and for cause types of inspections. The EMA also will do national programs. The MHRA will look at the investigational medicinal product when it's being done in the UK, serious breaches, and risk-based compliance. The triggers that you'll see are those types of reasons for FDA and EMA, with the MHRA looking at serious breaches, identified risks, and completed trials. You'll see again the areas of focus. The FDA still tends to focus on data and documentation, while the EMA and MHRA will focus on the trial master file and the systems and processes. Now, we do recognize that the agencies are beginning to collaborate and partner when they do inspections, so they are learning from each other. So this knowledge center that I'm sharing with you now is constantly in a state of being refreshed. So we are constantly getting new experiences, and we are learning that as the agencies share, we begin to see the FDA focus more on trial master files, more on some of the things that other agencies focus on. So this may change over time, and we will show that and reflect that within our Knowledge Center. For inspection approaches, you'll see the FDA will focus on district-based. They are announced, generally speaking, and will look at the city risks, or the CTTI identified type risks. The EMA will focus on notification, and they look at the trial master file. MHRA does both of those, and they focus on their gray guide. You'll see findings there in terms of some of the most prevalent is around investigative sites, the IRBs, and sponsor monitor CROs for the FDA, and you'll see the others that are depicted for the other agencies. Now, the findings will change over time, but these are the most prevalent or impactful, and there is more detail within the Knowledge Center than what's depicted on this slide. If I expand this to the 3 additional agencies, you'll see some differences in all of these areas. The PMDA does focus on marketing applications, and they look at their good post-marketing study practices as well. CFDA will focus on those as well, and for cause and routine for clinical research institutions. And you'll see Health Canada has a different approach around clinical trial compliance programs. You'll see the triggers for these 3 agencies. I'm not going to read all the content. Again, these slides will be available for you, but you'll begin to see that it provides differences between these agencies and some commonalities between the agencies. Areas of focus, you'll see that the PMDA will focus on checklists. The CFDA will focus on clinical trial conditions and regulatory compliance. And you'll see where Health Canada has been going. And you'll see the approaches. They'll do PMDA will do GCP and document conformity in parallel, and they're announced in advance. The CFDA uses some targets, and they will do self-assessment forms to help identify on-site inspections, and so forth. And you will see the findings in terms of data inconsistencies is a focus of PMDA. Data traceability is a key focus for CFDA. And you'll see that systems and procedures and records and training is where Health Canada will have key findings. If we proceed on the foci of the inspectors. So in this case, this is the second layer of the knowledge grid. So if we look at the trial master file, the FDA wants to make sure it's available, but they generally are still requesting documents, although they're becoming more fluent at actually getting into the trial master file. For the EMA and MHRA, we know that they go directly into the eTMF, and the MHRA, in fact, want all the answers to their questions to be available through the eTMF. So some quite different perspectives there. In our Knowledge Center, the extent of this trial master file experiences, which I'm going to show you here in a moment, is quite extensive, and so there's great insights there. On the monitoring, the FDA will focus on BIMO and systems and the trial site level information, while the EMA will focus on some of those same things through to the clinical study report, and you'll see the MHRA focuses on following SOPs. Systems and data, it's a primary focus for FDA. You'll see for MHRA, it is not a primary focus. And you'll see again some other areas. Site performance, there's algorithms that they focus on high-risk sites across the agencies. There's documentation where they will look for, some agencies provide dossier requirements, others do not. Protocol deviations is pretty common across the agencies, and the selection, qualification, and oversight of providers, a lot of focus on contracts and the oversight of those providers and tools and mechanisms to control and manage that. For the other 3 agencies, you'll see differences in how they do use the trial master file, a little less stringency on this than MHRA, but some engagement with the trial master file, and in some cases with the LIMS availability, which is your learning systems and the documentation of training. Monitoring of investigative sites, you'll see that there's trial site and subject level information for the PMDA. You'll see that they focus on conducting oversight of the CRO, and how the CRO does the monitoring activities is a focus of the CFDA. And again, I won't go through all of this in detail, but you'll see that PMDA will focus on their Annex 8, and procedures there. For site performance, you'll see a focus on inspection document checklists for Health Canada. And you'll see other aspects there. Again, a fair amount of consistency around protocol deviations, but CFDA will focus on concomitant drug use more than other agencies. If I go to the layer of the glimpse of, I'll call it, the member experiences, we have tremendous depth of experiences and tips that our members have shared. So in this PowerPoint slide, time only permits sharing a glimpse today. But logistics, you'll see that at this point, we're watching this also very closely to see if there are changes due to the ICH E6 Revision 2. So early on, there are indications that the agencies are beginning to inform sponsors and providers and sites about what they will be expecting as they inspect trials that have been started or conducted while ICH E6 R2 has been in play. But up until now, many of the inspections have been conducted on trials that were completed prior to ICH E6 R2. So they've not specifically done those requirements for the existing inspections or the past inspections, but they're indicating the transition will be in play. I will share more of those insights during the Inspection Readiness Summit in August that EXL is hosting in Philadelphia. But in regards to experiences that we've seen up to date, you'll see the FDA will do multiple days on site, and that's true for each of the agencies. For the trial master file, you'll see the MHRA does extensive eTMF access is a key finding from our member companies. There's an in-depth set of experiences, real detailed experiences that our members have shared on our Knowledge Center. So if you are a member company of the consortium, you can access that if your company is there, and you can look at the details more specifically on site. The monitoring activities, you'll see monitoring plan is always a focus here. Issue resolution is also an expectation that these agencies will focus on. Systems and data, you'll see that FDA focuses on validation and analytics, while MHRA will focus on quality metrics. You'll see the site performance, qualification, and training for the FDA, data queries for MHRA, and the systems and procedures for the EMA. So some differences on that. You'll see the documentation. The BIMO required docs are available for the FDA. You'll see that contracts and proof of insurance for the EMA, and also relevant persons present to discuss for the MHRA. They want people there to be able to respond and answer. Protocols, you'll see a lot of focus on the deviations and reports that actually identify what was done and how those were dealt with. And the selection qualification of providers, you'll see that they look for credibility of inspectors and the speakers to be able to respond to that during inspections. You'll see prospective oversight is an expectation of MHRA. And you'll see some of the other aspects here related to these experiences. When we expand to the PMDA, CFDA, and Health Canada, again, logistics, PMDA is very checklist-oriented. CFDA will have selected a number of sites, and they spend several days on site. And then Health Canada will do risk-based compliance program, which they define. The trial master file, you'll see the documents, they want them to be provided. You'll see that, again, everybody focuses on the monitoring plan, following of the monitoring plan, and reports related to that for the monitoring of investigative sites. And again, you'll see the other information here. As I look at my time, I'm going to continue at this point in time. These slides, again, will be available. You'll see for pharmacovigilance, we'll focus on certain aspects here. I'm going to dive into that in more detail on the next slide. So we will dive there now. And so this is where pharmacovigilance goes. You'll see that there are supporting references for each agency. You'll see the types of inspections. For the FDA, they will focus on clinical trials, as do the other two agencies depicted here. The FDA will also do a fair amount on the post-marketing drug experience and the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. The EMA will focus on routine pharmacovigilance inspections, for-cause inspections, and product-related kinds of inspections. And you'll see where the MHRA will do routine and for-cause. The triggers you'll see there are the market applications or other for the trials, and then the other reasons for post-marketing types of inspections. And you'll see the approaches taken, whether they focus on products with greatest safety risks for the FDA, whether it's a systems master file for the EMA, or other requirements for the MHRA. And you'll see the findings, and then there's a focus on safety reports. Now, if we look at the other three agencies, you'll see again that there are supporting references available for each. You'll see that the types of inspections, again, everybody does the clinical trial inspections, and you'll see the other kinds of reliability assurance or routine pharmacovigilance inspections or post-marketing inspections for these agencies as well. And you'll see the triggers that each of these agencies have defined for theirs. So these are the types of things that we highlight and focus and recognize across this multi-layered grid. Much more content, again, so if you are member companies of the consortium, we encourage you to go onto our Knowledge Center if you have not already and look at those in more detail. As I close out on my portion of the session here, and we then map over or transition over to Grace, who will give you some real experiences and case study perspectives, here's a polling question we'd like you to answer. Please indicate the agency that generates the greatest anxiety when you are anticipating an upcoming inspection. So we've got all of our 6 agencies here. I'll give you a moment to respond, and we will look at your responses. So it looks like very close with MHRA and with the FDA, and then close behind is EMA. You'll see significantly fewer concerns for the other agencies. I would suspect that it's not necessarily because they are easier in all aspects to work with. It's probably the prevalence that it's more common because of where individuals are doing market authorization applications, that the top 3 are of greatest anxiety and concern. But that's just something that we recognize here, that those are your areas of concern. As I get ready to transition, let me look to see if there are some questions posed that I want to answer very quickly here. We can take further questions later. It says here, one person said that previously the FDA had not accessed systems directly in, for instance, in breach of their insurance with preference for request for documents. Has this now changed? And so we are continually monitoring that. Again, I think we have not seen dramatic changes in the inspectorate's approaches. Some of that is because they themselves have to change their historical approaches to new approaches. But as is suggested by this question, we are seeing some changes. We're also seeing that since the agencies are doing co-inspections, they're sitting side by side, they're watching each other. We noted by some of our members that the FDA will sit and watch the EMA or MHRA as they go into the ETMF. We also notice the documents that they pursue, and also we see the European agencies watching the FDA and the target documents that they focus. And so we do anticipate and see some changes that are occurring. So we'll come back. I'm going to transition now that we're halfway through the time. I'll transition over to Grace Crawford, who will begin to share some case perspectives, and then we'll come back as time permits at the end and answer more questions. So Grace, you want to take the lead here?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Now, for this part, if you would bear with me, I'd like to walk you through some actual experiences with inspections and some of the hot topics. So I've bucketed into 3 key areas I thought you'd be interested in. But if you could put yourself in that inspection room, in that seat across from the inspector, whether it be FDA, MHRA, EMA, and think about how you would respond to some of these situations. I think you would get some benefit in thinking through these case studies this way. So if we first look at the area of trial master file, which is definitely a hot topic and a very key focal point of an inspection. Let's say I'm the MHRA or the EMA for that matter, and I'm embarking on this inspection, and you've given me direct access to the eTMF, which is great. That's what I wanted to see. And I'm going through, and I like to focus on the metadata, and I'm seeing that there has been a flurry of activity right before I've arrived. That is not something that I like to see. Completeness and timeliness is something that's an expectation of the regulators. So I would be asking you questions on why there's been this flurry of activity. What is your process? Do you have metrics to kind of keep an eye on this? It would probably then lead me to some questions around your QC process, because in essence, that helps assure and give assurance that your TMF is complete. So I'm now looking at what you provided me with. You provided me with some summary reports of your functional QC, and now I want to know how, and it's great that you have these reports, but now I want to know how you do the trending of the findings from the QC and how you've communicated this information back to the functions. So this just gives you a flavor of some of the kind of hot topics and areas that are looked at, especially from the European perspective, for completeness. And then adding the FDA into the mix, and this is across the board of all agencies. As far as completeness, what often happens is whether you're not providing direct access to certain parts of the trial master file that's outside of your eTMF, or simple things like gaining access to emails. Emails often form part of the story of the trial, and if they're not in your trial master file is complete. So think about how you would address those areas. Direct access, as Steve went through what the various agencies expect, we know that is expected for the European inspectors, and there was that question somebody posed about the FDA, are they starting to do that? And as Steve mentioned, there's random reports that I'm hearing that the FDA from time to time is asking for direct access, but for the most part, they are asking for records, and those are being delivered to the inspection room as you would typically expect, as they've done historically. So think about where all your records reside that aren't in a TMF and how you would give them access. So how would you provide that direct access? Or if need be, walk them through it for those areas and artifacts that are not in your eTMF. Definitely something that's looked at a lot. And then for original records, and this is definitely more of a focus of agencies such as the MHRA, they want to know a lot about the certification process, and that is now in ICH E6R2. You see definitions and expectations around having a validated process for certifying that the copy is identical to the original. So now you're at a site, the site's being inspected, and your CRA helping the site, and MHRA notices that you've used your phone to take pictures of paper documents. They're now going to ask questions about what security measures were in place to make all that happen. And now they're looking in the eTMF, and they see a black and white document, and it happens to be an MHRA document, and they know that their logo is blue, and they're looking at a black and white version in the TMF. So now they're going to ask you, where's that original? Oh, you don't have it? What was your certification process? to confirm that this black and white scanned version is identical to what was the original. And perhaps a point of frustration is when they're going through the eTMF and they actually can't open documents in their original format. So think about Excel spreadsheets, or especially if you transfer content from one media to another. Again, this goes back to your certification process. How did you verify and confirm that the content is identical to the original? So that's a bit about the certified copy versus the original documentation process. Another very big area of inspections is data integrity. And we do know that often audit trails are asked for, reviewed, and used for many aspects of the inspection. So think about scenarios where you've migrated data from one system into another. It happens. Either you switch systems or there's been some sort of vendor transition. And now the inspector is looking at that and they're now looking for the audit trails, and oops, the audit trails were not migrated from the original system. So that's going to be an issue with the completeness of your TMF. They will also be looking for access rights. Did the right people have access? And who's checking for that? Who's responsible for that? And now I'm going to put you back into sort of a site scenario. I'm an inspector at a site, and I'm looking over the audit trail for the IRX system. And I happen to see that for a lot of the data recorded in the system that I could see on the delegation of authority log is handled by the pharmacy staff, it's actually the same person that's doing it day after day. But when I look on the delegation of authority log, there's multiple pharmacy staff. So I'm questioning why there's actually just one person doing all of this. So as I dig into this further and interview some of the pharmacy staff, I come to find out that all of these staff are using the same login credentials. So with my MHRA hat on, I'm wondering why the sponsor or the CRO, if the sponsor delegated it to the CRO, was not interrogating audit trails, and I could have identified this scenario that I've just come across. So audit trail interrogation is becoming an important part of the clinical trial expectations. And some of the things that inspectors see could have been identified earlier by the sponsors and could have been revealed and dealt with before an inspector finds it. And then the last area under TMF is related to unblinded content. So now you're sitting in the inspection room yet again, and the inspector wants to start reviewing TMF content that is actually unblinded. So, most companies have a process and a way of protecting the blind, and it involves either storing this content in a separate place, and then at the end of the study, once the blind is broken, moving it back into the eTMF, or there's other scenarios. But this is an active study, and the inspector would like to see this. So how would you handle that? This is a situation where it could be appropriate to walk the MHRA. So you have somebody with the designated role that is unblinded on that study could walk the inspector through that part of the eTMF to address that. So these are some of the things you need to think about, especially as it relates to the TMF. Moving on to CRO oversight. And I'll start by mentioning that the MHRA has found lack of trial oversight as one of the top major findings back in 2015, 2016. I think that trend continues. I've seen some EMA report summaries throughout industry that highlight a lack of appropriate oversight as a key contributor to a lot of the findings that they've seen. So this is a very important area, something you should pay attention to. Obviously, if you're taking a risk-based approach with oversight, you do want to focus on what's critical to quality. I'll talk about some plans around that in a moment. You want to focus on your inclusion-exclusion criteria, your primary data that's important for efficacy, any of your endpoints, and focus on that. But you also want to consider how you're handling the oversight of all the various vendors on the trial, or if you are a vendor for a sponsor, how you're helping them accomplish things that would constitute as appropriate oversight to prevent inspectional findings. For example, if you're a sponsor and the inspection's going on and your CRO holds, at this point, part of the TMF because they have their own electronic TMF and they're filing their records in that. And with my inspection hat on, now I'm going to ask for the audit trail of the CRO's eTMF, and I'm going to look for evidence that the sponsor has routinely looked at and accessed the CRO's eTMF. So were they routinely sampling? Did they have a QC plan? So are they overseeing that aspect of the trial? I have a quick story for you, an interesting story about oversight, and this was a sponsor inspection going as expected until the inspector started asking a lot of questions around work that was actually a technology vendor, like think of an ePro vendor. And the responsibility of that ePro vendor was delegated to the CRO that the sponsor was using to manage the study. And it got to the point where the sponsor obviously could not answer a lot of the questions that the inspector had, and it led to some challenges because they wanted to speak to this vendor directly. And unfortunately, it was the CRO that held the contract with this technology vendor. The technology vendor, fortunately, worked with the sponsor and did accommodate this unique situation where the inspectors wanted to speak to them and they had to provide records. And ultimately, the sponsor wound up with an inspection observation around the CRO's qualification visit audit report. The inspector didn't feel it was adequate. So that just goes to show you how important it is to think about all your vendors, what you've delegated to some of those vendors, and the critical data for your study. So again, if an endpoint is an ePro parameter and there's a sort of a third party addressing that, how would you handle that during an inspection? Moving on to my final area that I'd like to highlight, and that's with risk-based monitoring. And we all know that there is encouragement from various health authorities to sponsors and CROs to adopt this approach. They definitely see the value in risk-based monitoring, and ICHE6 R2 does highlight this and the methods to determine what type of monitoring that you'd be doing. Along with that, inspectors want to know how the monitors were trained. And this is not only now the monitors going out to the site, but this sort of in-house central team that's part of the risk monitoring program and how all that works. And do they have the right amount of time to do their work? And what plans are in place to describe all of this? And are they being followed? And are the deliverables being achieved? And how is the risk-based monitoring governed and controlled within your organization. So again, to highlight some actual inspectional situations, put yourself, again, back in an inspection. Now we're at a site, and the MHRA is at a site, and they're looking at the trial master file that's held at the site. And actually, they want to see some of the sponsor TMF records, and the CRA is there during the inspection, and they want to watch the CRA navigate through the TMF. This is something that's held of high importance to the MHRA. They don't want people to use the TMF as a repository. Their expectation is that this is a real live system that people go to run and manage the study, and they rely on the records in the TMF. So there have been reports of them actually watching people navigate through the TMF to demonstrate that they're familiar with it and they can get through it and they're using it. This could also pertain to, you take it one step forward, the CRA and how many times they accessed a site's electronic health record or electronic medical record. Again, they could ask for audit trails and look for history and evidence of that. And then, again, thinking about the IXRS system, because we all know how important that is in a clinical trial when that's relevant. And one of the important things an IRX system can do is help a site when emergency unblinding is needed. And if I'm an inspector and I ask for the audit trail of the IXRS system, and I don't see that the PI has access to it. So if there's an emergency situation, how would the PI be able to handle this if he or she has no access to the IXRS system? Probably because they haven't completed their training or what have you, but this is an active study that I'm inspecting, and I'm scratching in my head on how that's supposed to work and why the monitoring didn't pick up on that. So that's the examples for risk-based monitoring. I just want to quickly scroll through some of these questions to see before I move on to some more of the risk-based approaches. If there's questions I can answer for you now. I saw a question about storyboards and how people are using those. We at MedImmune do use storyboards and rely on those storyboards when it comes to preparing for inspections. In addition to study storyboards, as critical issues arise during a project, teams are often asked to put together an issue storyboard that would allow people down the line, years down the road when an inspection is occurring, there would be this documentation to help support the story of what happened and why they did what they did. Lots of questions coming in. That's good. I think we might have to go through some of these when I finish up. But questions about the certification process. I mean, basically, you need to outline how you will certify those records. So making sure that it's documented and you've got a form, or you can do it. Some electronic systems have mechanisms that you can certify records, and you can use that. Okay, I'm going to move on to more about the MHRA, and this could apply to other agencies and their risk-based approach. So think about when they're selecting sites to go out and inspect. What are the factors that they consider? And this should be part of your preparation plan. So thinking about any high potential sites that could be inspected. Think about the factors such as their dropout rates, their screen failure rates, their AEs and SAEs. And it's not necessarily high numbers of SAEs, but it could also be low numbers as compared to other sites. Protocol deviations is an important factor that you want to look at and make your risk-based decisions on guessing what sites might be inspected. Obviously, high enrollers and some of the more traditional risk factors, but you can also look at data queries. Are they taking a long time to resolve as compared to other sites? And, are there sites that have had a lot of issues documented in their trip reports, the monitoring trip reports? So just some examples of the risk-based approach when it comes to selecting sites for inspection. And Steve mentioned a lot of the great information in the knowledge management area of the inspection readiness portion of the website. But there's also a lot of tools available. And if you go into the document hierarchy and look at some of the tools, there are a lot of tools that can help you with your risk-based approach. So if you think about decisions and study teams making decisions, you'll see great examples of ways that can be documented. And I will tell you that during inspections, I can think of an example where the EMA was looking into CRO oversight, and the team was able to show documentation of a decision log that helped demonstrate oversight and evidence of decisions that were made through the study. And another hot topic is, and this is for EMA, MHRA, and FDA that I'm aware of, they're wanting to see decisions made related to the protocol and the CSR and examples, actual examples of discussions and what the decision was. So a tool like this, if you don't already have some sort of documentation to capture that, could help you with that. So just keep in mind that as you go through what gaps you might have in your organization as it relates to your risk-based approach, think about what tools you might be able to access from the AQC site. And I'm just going to quickly wrap up with a few highlights of some various risk-based approaches, and then leave a little time to get to some of these great questions that are coming in. This is nothing new. I've highlighted some different requirements on this slide, and while ICH E6R2 is a newer document, there's always been documentation around quality by design and other sort of risk-based drivers in our industry. So it's nothing new. It's just becoming, it's crystallizing a bit more in the documentation that we're seeing throughout the regulations. And speaking of quality by design, many of us have, especially with the implementation of ICH E6R2, are taking a hard look at, from a clinical trial perspective, how teams are assessing risk early on. This is all about proactive assessment of risk to minimize errors that matter. So focusing on what's critical to quality and minimizing errors that matter. So this is just a simple flow of what it could entail, getting the study team together at the beginning, hopefully when you have a draft protocol, identifying what's critical to quality, prioritizing all of those and coming up with mitigations, and all of those risks should feed into your various study plans. We have lots of plans, and you definitely should be feeding any risk particular to your trial and building the mitigations into your plans, and thinking about what can be measured, and then continuing that process all throughout your study until you report it out at the end. And this is just one of many examples of what an integrated quality risk management plan could look like. We could have a whole separate discussion on IQRMPs, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of what something like that would look like. And as I said, we've been taking risk-based approaches for quite some time now, and I really wanted to trigger your mind to think about some of the areas where we've already been doing this. So a lot of the quality assurance programs have been developing audit plans based on risk for a long time. Vendor selection, you can't qualify each and every vendor. You're going to focus on the critical ones. Same thing with your vendor oversight plans. Are you going to put an oversight plan in for a meeting planner? I don't think so. I think you're going to focus on what's critical to your study. And these are just some examples of the plans that your integrated quality risk management plan should feed into. So your oversight plans, your risk-based monitoring, your monitoring plan itself, there certainly will be a lot of items in there that will mitigate risks you've identified proactively. And then ultimately, your CSR should summarize any key critical quality items. Often this is summarized in the form of your protocol deviations, but anything else you defined up front and what transpired during the study. In the essence of time, I just wanted to mention one last thing related to inspection prep, because we all take a risk-based approach with that. You're going to focus on your registrational trial versus your supportive studies. But if you really want to de-risk the logistics of your inspection, I highly recommend that you test the systems that you'll be giving inspectors direct access to, or even those that you'll be demoing the morning of. Obviously, people test them along the way, but I've seen scenarios where IT has done some sort of change overnight, and it affected the ability to access the system. So with that, this last slide just is a visual reminder of the various levels and where you should be assessing risk. So I think we'd like to see what questions we do have the opportunity to answer here.
And Grace, this is Steve. While you were speaking, I've looked at a few, so I might pose a few, some that you can answer, some that I can answer, and then in the remaining minute or so that we have left, we'll transition it back to Camille to close. So one of the questions, I think that's an interesting one, is there any experience from members where agencies are refusing to complete training in order to access the TMF for inspection? And the answer is absolutely yes. The MHRA expects that the eTMF is so easy to use, and because they've accessed some already, that they just simply want access. And I think if there's required training, especially anything at all extensive, that therefore your own organization will not be able to use it effectively. And so they want to be very intuitive, and that is exactly what they're expecting. Another question here is, you already answered the certified copy piece. Says, when asked about the SAE reports in the TMF, is it acceptable to document in the trial master file and respond to inspectors that the safety database is a central repository, not directly stored in the trial master file? So, Grace, your perspective on that?
Yes, and that is acceptable. So there are certain systems that hold data that they recognize and do find acceptable. So the safety database is one example, statistical databases, but it does need to be the data. So ancillary records that aren't data should be in your eTMF, but they will accept going, and even if it's you're showing them and navigating through the system and showing them what they need in those systems, that is acceptable. So there's a handful of those stat systems, safety database. So yeah, that is acceptable. And I see a question about a hybrid model. So you have a paper and electronic. I think it's important to be upfront and let whatever agency is doing the inspection know ahead of time that it is a hybrid model. I've seen scenarios where people have said, oh, we have a paper TMF, or oh, we have an electronic TMF, when that actually is not true. It's a hybrid, and as long as you are prepared to provide access to both of those, it should be fine.
Maybe in closing, the last question is kind of related to the eTMF, and then we'll transition it to Camille. It talks about how inspectors typically want to view an eTMF's audit trail. Do they want access to the system's back end in the audit system, or is an export of the audit trail acceptable?
I do know some systems, they will accept an export. So, for example, IXRS, and I know MHRA is very versed at going through Excel files that are audit trails. For the eTMF, they really want full access to that system. I know sponsors tend to create an inspector-only access. They're really starting to push for full access so that they can see, and they're getting quite accustomed to navigating to the metadata that they need. It could be providing reports, so they could go into the system and see reports of the metadata that they're looking for, but they're getting more savvy with the eTMF. But there's other systems that they would accept, like I said, an Excel export of the audit trail.
Okay. And thank you, Grace. And so we will respond to all the other questions that came through that have not yet been responded to. We will send those to the participants of this webinar. So I will pass it back to Camille. I know we've now, there's other upcoming events here. And so Camille, do you want to close us out today?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Steve and Grace. I want to thank everyone for joining, and I want to remind everyone that the presentation file, as well as the information for the 7th Inspection Readiness Summit, will be emailed to you. Both Steve and Grace will be speaking at EXL Events 7th Clinical Trial Inspection Readiness on August 13th to 14th in Philadelphia at the Inn at Penn. We are offering you up to a 15% discount code. Please use the code AVOCAWEB when signing up. I also want to remind you, which Steve just said, if you didn't get any of your answers, if you didn't get any of your questions answered, you will receive an email from Avoca. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everyone.